Welcome to the Mad Love Your Life show. I'm Mary D, the Joy Catalyst, here to be your host and transformation guide. Mad Love is about the mad, making a difference, and love is what we serve up to live a delicious life. My intention is to help you spark new ideas, break limiting beliefs, and align with your deepest dreams and desires. Get ready for laughter, inspiration, and finding your inner roar in every show. Hi, beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Mad Love Your Life show. I'm your host, Mary D. And if you don't already know me, I'm a business and life coach who helps move you from pain into purpose through transformation. You might be experiencing a big life transition like a career shift or a relationship shift or even an identity shift. And your business might be in stagnation or it could be in growth mode, but you aren't sure how to push it up to the next level and you're feeling stuck. So if you need strategy, if you need clarity, then I invite you into a conversation with me to see how I might be able to support you in elevating what's already working and expanding what's possible. For more information, you can head over to maryd.com and book a call or slide into my DMs on social. So much has been happening in the world, and it's been a very mixed bag of propaganda and politics and rough times, y'all. And I don't know about you, but it's so hard sometimes to know what is the truth and what is fiction. Because I'm finding that the things that I would have thought were fictional, they end up being true. And the things that I thought were true end up becoming fiction. And there's so many distractions out there right now. If you happen to be someone who's feeling that anxiety or fear or hopelessness, I want to encourage you to take a media detox. So go turn off your devices, get out in nature, go somewhere quiet where you could just be with yourself. My prayer for you today is actually the serenity prayer, which says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Today's episode is an invitation. It's not necessarily about becoming someone new, but remembering who you already are. To peel back the layers that life and labels, expectations, and survival mode have wrapped around you. Because here's the thing, somewhere along the way, many of us traded authenticity for approval. We shape-shifted to fit in, to be loved, to stay safe, or to be successful. And now parts of us are waking up and saying, wait, this isn't even me. And many people get to experience or seek out a spiritual awakening. And if you're someone who feels a little lost in this space, feels a little lost in this time, or you feel conflicted around your religious beliefs and perhaps how they collide with your desire to live an authentic life, something fully expressed, then I want to invite you into a conversation today. And as I share this story, I hope that if you identify with it in any way, that you're going to get some clarity around what next steps feel good for you. And I just hope that this blesses your journey. Also remember that not all who wander are lost, and most of us are on a journey to just find our way back to our authentic selves. When I look back on my life's journey, I can see so clearly how my beliefs shaped my life. I grew up in a Christian home where we believed that you had to say a prayer to accept Jesus in your heart in order to make it to heaven. And that was a level of achievement. And one of the other things we did was we spoke in tongues because it could be that we're speaking the language of angels or of our spirit. We also facilitated healings for people in Jesus' name, often casting out demons and calling on people to repent of witchcraft and all sorts of things. I remember being in junior high, and it left such an impression on me because, this is a very formative time of life. And I was out there praying for my friends as well as strangers and watching as many of them received instant healings, and for myself with injuries, receiving instant healings. And I would think, wow, this really works. How could anyone deny that this power exists through knowing Jesus? And at the same time, the conflict I had was in hearing the preacher at the pulpit talk about this hard line about how people were for sure going to hell or to some kind of eternal suffering or damnation if they didn't say a specific prayer. And that healing couldn't take place in any other way, shape, or form if, it wasn't backed by Jesus. So I'm remembering also that before I ever said that prayer myself, I'm going back to my younger self with the very full realization that I actually didn't feel any different with or without that prayer. I had this perception of God that was loving, protecting, inviting. And because that was my experience, I had natural joy and peace and light that carried me, and it carried with me, and you could see it in me. And then I got older, and someone said, hey, by the way, you were born a terrible sinner. You need to clean that up. And so because I was told this, I allowed it to be a belief that was handed down to me, and I wore it for a while. I wasn't fully bought in though, and I know this because I couldn't get to the point where I was condemning other people for not believing the same thing. I was trying it on myself, and I couldn't get behind it. I just couldn't get fully behind it. And then I started to really live and travel and experience other cultures and religions. And what I learned allowed me to really blossom and deepen my own spiritual experience, because in these experiences, I saw people who didn't believe exactly what I believed, but they had some similar strings of belief. They had their own nuances and rituals. They had their way that they learned to commune with God, and they had a joy and a peace and a light that I could not deny. Through these experiences, I was able to come to understand that within the organized religions, that none of them seemed to have it perfectly right either. The Buddhist monks were still sneaking around, violating their vows, which was no different than the decades of child molestation we've seen come out of the Catholic Church and the depravity of Christian churches, or extremism that exists amongst some Islamic functions. So I really got to see this light, but also the shadow side of belief systems as well. So it wasn't like it was just one thing, it was a mixed bag. And as I've continued to go down my journey, my path of growth, as I continue to listen to my spirit, I am met with a lot of love and compassion to be able to see myself and others through a lens of grace. Because y'all, none of us are perfect. Most of us are striving for some absolute answer to an age-old question, and we can get really caught up in the fear. And only until we confront these fears, when we can acknowledge them, can we really begin to heal and also start to unravel the dogma that surrounds how we show up to meet God every day. And this also takes me back to what I believe is part of Christ consciousness, and that's upholding the two greatest commandments, which are to love the Lord God with all your heart and to love your neighbor. And when we can see God in others, we can decide to act and react differently. What if God was disguised as the homeless man you walk by on the street? Or what if God was disguised as the barista who serves you your morning cup of coffee? What if God is that quiet person at your office who doesn't say much? Would you show up differently in the world if you knew that one of those people were God in your life? I thought I was a Christian, and I said that I was for a really long time. And the funny part of that is that I would meet people who assumed that I was Buddhist. And as more time goes on, I'm realizing that I am all and I am none of those identities. I am simply a woman who loves God and tries to see that God exists in everything and everyone, and that includes in myself. And I've learned that when I push judgment aside, that is where the treasure trove of peace exists, because there is nothing to condemn or criticize or complain about. There's only gratitude. Now, I personally don't believe in this like set version of heaven and hell, and that if we die, that's it, that those are the only two places to go. I've seen people make their own lives on this earth heaven, and I've seen them make their lives hell. I do believe that our spirit lives on when we pass from this life, but that it's simply a rebirth, that energy is a transition into the next experience. And perhaps there is a heaven-like experience, but if any of us think about it long enough, it'll make our head hurt because we can't really know what it's actually like or completely perceive what it is and how it will exist. And yet, many of us will die on that sword because we are looking externally to get the answers that are already living inside of us. And today, what I want to talk to you about is the psychology of identity. So this is how our earliest beliefs shape who we think we are, and how can we begin to shed these outdated versions of ourselves. The idea here is that we're not fixing, we're remembering. So from a psychological perspective, our identity is formed through early life. It's through the experiences that happen in early childhood, through attachment patterns, and also through societal conditioning. This is going to be things like what we see on TV. It's going to be the shows that we watched. It's going to be the norms that were passed down to us in school. And humaning means that we love to tell ourselves stories. We love to make meaning out of everything. And we often internalize roles. So the good girl, the strong one, the people pleaser, the achiever, the leader. And from all these stories, our nervous system encodes what earns us love or safety. And eventually, these patterns get so familiar that we start to think that they are us. So according to Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, identity versus role confusion is a critical life stage as we grow in adolescence. However, many of us didn't complete that work. We got to a stage and we stopped. We didn't go all the way through. And so what happens is we carry that role confusion into our adulthood. Now, there's a difference between identity and authenticity. So identity is shaped by outer labels like mom, dad, teacher, CEO, musician. Authenticity, however, is shaped by our inner truth. Sometimes what you've been praised for, like being strong or being productive or being selfless, those labels can become a prison. It's why you will see star athletes, for example, who get hurt and can no longer play, go into a deep, dark place because their whole identity was around being that athlete. They feel like they've lost a sense of purpose when they can no longer identify with that label, because for so long, this is how they learn to be recognized and appreciated and acknowledged. This is their contribution. And they feel at a loss because now that identity is being challenged. And sadly, a lot of times that's also where you see them go down a path that might lead to alcoholism or substance abuse or suicide, because their sense of self-worth is so tied up in that identity that they can't fathom that they can go on in this life without being that thing. So I want you to think about a time where you were rewarded for being who you were not. So I'll tell you who I was. I was the good girl for a very long time. I got good grades. I didn't have sex as a teenager. I listened to my parents. I went to college and I got a job. And through all of this, I built a strong reputation and I did garner a lot of respect. And those aren't terrible things. But that role stopped fitting so nicely when I wanted to explore and to have sex and enjoy it. When I wanted to be an entrepreneur and not feel like I needed to have a boss who told me when I could show up and how I needed to show up. When I wanted to express myself in a way that my parents, I knew, may perceive as shameful in some way. And this is when I realized the role that I was playing, it didn't fit anymore. I was married super young, 22 years old, after dating this guy for 4 years. And we didn't really want to get married, but our parents really wanted us to get married. And so we did. And the general theme is that we were living in sin and no one wanted us to live in sin anymore. So since everyone knew we were having sex, I remember this was such a big deal. It was a big deal to my mom, who, by the way, was never abstaining from sex at any point in her single life, but somehow decided I was supposed to abide by that rule. So out of guilt, we got married, and it wasn't 18 months later and we were splitting up, and I had this epiphany because I felt so much guilt around the fact that I'd made these vows and now I'm not able to keep them. And that really tapped into, I want to be a person of my word. And here I am struggling to be a person of my word and keep these marriage vows that I gave because there's just so much wrapped up in this relationship that is just not working. And in that moment, I was like, why did I get married? And as I sat with it, I realized there was a lot of guilt and a lot of shame there. And a lot of it was also just the pleasing. I wanted to please my parents. I loved them so much. And it seemed like the next thing to do. And the one thing I said to myself is, I am never going to allow guilt or shame to make my decisions for me. No more, because this is a painful, painful experience. And it's challenging my integrity. And I certainly, through all of this, am going to be better at understanding where something is my own conviction, or is it a conviction that belongs to someone else that they're putting on me and I'm choosing to take it on. And as I use that discretion in my life, I began to see more and more clearly where just because my parents had a fear didn't mean it needed to be my fear. And their beliefs don't necessarily need to be my beliefs. And in this newfound freedom, I had even more peace because I was releasing this identity that I had outgrown. So you can outgrow an identity just like an outfit. That doesn't mean it wasn't once useful. Uh, it just means it doesn't fit anymore. And I want us to also talk about what it looks like to retire a version of ourselves that were built in survival mode. So the version of you who hustled for worthiness, the one who kept the peace instead of speaking up, the one who never asked for help because you didn't want to be a burden. And by the way, I have identified with all of these. I hustled for the first half of my life out to prove to the world that I was worthy of love, worthy of money, worthy of praise. And one day that hustle almost killed me. And as I got still with myself, I realized that I could lean in and do less while receiving more. And when I got diagnosed with breast cancer, I didn't have the bandwidth. I didn't have the energy to keep supporting everyone like I had been. I was getting sued and having a breast cancer diagnosis at the same time. My accounts were frozen and I didn't have the money to output. I couldn't buy dinner for everyone anymore. I really had to surrender to the chase, the pursuit of things, of money, of being the person everyone gets to come to. And it was through that surrender that I got to soften. I found this ease and this rebirth that were really magical. Now, part of me grieved the pieces that felt powerful through control because control feels certain. But life is so often out of control. And then what happens to us? Well, that was my learning. It was to let go of control, and it was to realize how much more relaxing it is to be in the flow, and that there's no true freedom when we're striving to feed our ego. The joy and the comfort come in living our authentic selves. It's in redefining our own definition of what success is versus what we're being told that it is or what we're seeing it fed to us in the media. Neuroplasticity tells us that our brain is capable of changing throughout our life. So this means you are never stuck. You're never stuck if you don't want to be. Rewiring your identity through conscious repetition and aligned action is not only possible, it's actually proven. And this is why we talk about being more conscious, being more mindful. Can we have a level of self-awareness around how we show up, how we're talking, how we're eating, how we're drinking, how we are friending, how we're humaning, all of those things. And we don't all have to take giant steps. We don't have to go extreme. We don't have to go cold turkey on every vice. We can actually rebuild our neural pathways. We can replace these old habits with new good habits, one small consistent step at a time. It's like a weight loss journey. It doesn't have to be about going to the gym for 3 hours a day and eating a super restrictive diet only to fall out of that after 30, 60, 90 days because it's unsustainable. But instead, it's maybe starting with a 30-minute walk and 25 sit-ups consistently until we start to see the changes. And then what was once hard becomes your new normal. So, how do we get back to remembering? Here are some practices to help you reconnect with the you beneath all of those roles. Number one is mirror work. So you can ask yourself, who am I when no one else is watching? And this allows you to look in the mirror and literally ask yourself that question and have the conversation. For those of you who are using AI, this is a great opportunity to open up your chat GPT and say, hey, what questions can you ask me to help me dive in to know who I am when no one is watching? And I guarantee you it will give you some great prompts that you can answer, and it'll probably converse with you around what this mirror work looks like and allow you to see some of the shadow, but also some of the light. They are all intertwined and they all go together. And it's only in when we can see our own reflection that we really see what's happening and we see what's there. The other one is to meditate or journal on this question, which is, what part of me have I ignored in order to be accepted? And I'm going to say it again. What part of me have you ignored in order to feel accepted? And then this last one is one of my favorites. I'm a firm believer in inner child work because so many of us have experienced wounds in our childhood. And doing inner child work is one way that we can go back and nurture that inner child and really create some healing. And this is done through visualizing yourself at a young age and remembering, what did you love? What did you believe was possible? And can you go back to that inner child and let them know, as the adult you are now, that they're safe and that they can have what they love and that anything is possible? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is unlearn who the world told you to be. That old version, it's not needed anymore. At one point, it probably helped you survive, but it is no longer needed to help you thrive. So honor it, thank it, and let it go. Remember that you're not broken, you're blooming, and this season of your life can be your excavation if you want it to be. And I know that you will find gold. So thanks for joining us on the show today. Please do drop us a subscribe, like, and follow, and feel free to share the message with those that you love if this segment helped you today. Until next time, may abundance walk beside you, may joy go before you, and may love always light and guide you on your path. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. We air live every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Brave TV. We hope to see you back next week. For more ways to connect with my guests, content, programs, and retreats, just head over to www.marydee.com and subscribe. That's MARYDEE.com.